Good morning, good afternoon. This is Benjamin for another session of the Virtual IoT Meetup. I'm joined today by my colleague and boss, actually, Mike Milinkovic, and the goal is to basically go through the results of the survey, of this year's survey, the IoT Developer Survey. I hope many of you participated. If you did, you're probably even more interested in hearing what other people said. So this is the fourth year we're doing this, and yeah, we're pretty excited to share the results with you also, as always. And obviously, we'll let people we'll leave some time for people to collect, but the chat is the best way to engage, right, and to ask questions. You can also let us know on Twitter should you have any particular comments. But yeah, some of the findings you may or may not agree with some of the trends, or in any case, it'll be interesting to discuss whether we all share the same point of view. So without further ado, I will share my screen and go through the slide deck. All right. So yeah, like I said, this is the fourth time we're doing this. So we've been doing the first IoT Developer Survey in 2015, and there's actually some links that you can, if you didn't check the surveys in previous years, you may be interested in seeing sort of the evolution, although we've tried to actually present some of the trends that we identified. So this year, the survey was conducted earlier this spring over the course of a couple months. 500 plus people responded, and as you may know, the sort of the main organizers of this survey are the participants from the Eclipse IoT working group, and we are working with those people to sort of put together the questions. But we also get input and help in promoting the survey from a European project that the Eclipse Foundation is actually involved in, called Agile IoT. IEEE is also helping us spread the results and promote the survey in their community, and so is the Open Mobile Alliance, which is now, by the way, called OMA SpecWorks. And so yeah, what did we find this year? And so there's a link to the slides in the Virtual IoT Meetup page, and so basically the slides contain all the data and all the charts you may need to see basically all the answers. But we've tried to sort of collect sort of the key findings, right? And it starts with a question that we've been asking from day one. We want to use the survey as a way to understand better what people are building, right? And it might be a bias in the way we in our respondents pool, if you will, because of course, like Eclipse IoT and IEEE and many others are effectively technology providers, and the technology is being used probably one way or other to build IoT platforms, and it would appear that that's what most of the respondents are doing. Although number 2 and number 3, and for basically the top 3 for the past 3 or 4 years, are always been the same. Home automation seems to be a pretty big thing, and so is industrial automation, right? And if you look a bit down in the other industries that people seem to be involved in, there's some movement, right? It would appear that agriculture is becoming more and more important for people. So is automotive. So I guess for automotive, with like in the past few months, few years, there's more and more happening around autonomous driving and self-driving cars and whatnot. So that might explain people building connected cars one way or the other. Other trends, although it's probably a bit subtle, but smart cities might seem to be more and more important. Energy management, a bit less so. Could it be that that people sort of approach all things smart cities and smart grids, etc., under sort of a more global focus? I guess it could be, but And same for building automation, right? Is it because it becomes part of a more global smart city approach? But long story short, I guess, yeah, people are very much involved in home automation, industrial automation. And it's already a very wide spectrum, I guess. And yeah, the platforms that are being built are, one way or the other, they're generic, right? Probably people build a home automation solutions, home automation applications that are generic enough so that we can call them platforms, right? The key IoT concerns, again, something we've been asking from day one. What are the key topics, the key things people have in mind when they build IoT, and or what are their concerns? And security has always been number one and still is, and we will see later in the deck that when we ask about more specifically what people do with security, as opposed to previous years, not only people are concerned with security, but they actually start doing stuff, right? And becoming more and more involved in using things like over-the-air firmware upgrade, etc. But yeah, I guess it's good to know, as opposed to a few years back where everybody was like, yeah, security is important for IoT, but nobody was like really serious about it, or nobody knew where to start. So this seems to be changing. Connectivity, hardware integration. This is always this has always been in the top three, including in previous years. It would seem that it's becoming less of a concern. Probably, I mean, for connectivity, there's some new standards that maybe help people address how are they going to connect their low power devices, and so LoRaWAN, Sigfox, NB IoT, you name it, probably helps make people a bit less scared about how they're going to do connectivity. The big news this year is the fact that we have people telling us that they, like, one of the concerns is we need to collect data and we need to make sense of the data. And this used to be, I think, position number 4, number 5. And this year, yeah, people seem to, one way or the other, realize that doing connected gadgets or connected devices for the sake of it is not really going to cut it. And it's really about collecting and making sense of all the data. And further down the deck, we actually have some interesting findings around IoT data and IoT databases. And yeah, we'll see that in just a couple of slides, actually.
Yeah, for me, I think the data collection and analytics popping up there is an indication that people are actually getting past proof of concepts and into actual deployments. Now that they're actually getting data, they realize that they've got to do something with it. I would not be surprised if in a year or two down the road, the next topic that we see coming up, bubbling up into the top set, is going to be device management. Because, you know, once they've got deployed applications and they start getting data, then down the road, I wouldn't be surprised if device management becomes more of a concern, as they realize that being able to update devices in the field and manage the software and hardware resources is going to be something that's going to be very important to be able to do at scale.
Yeah, that's right. And again, to the point around the data, I think that also has some impacts in the way approaching the way they're building their backend systems. And there's also some interesting findings in the next few slides in that regard. So yeah, number 2 concern is security, and like I said, we are sort of happy to see that more and more people actually start using security practices in their solutions. We've always asked, like, as part of the question, which is basically, well, which of the following key security practices do you use? We always ask, well, and maybe you don't do security, in which case be honest and tell us. And this category of people is becoming less and less important. So that's great. And I guess at the top of the list is still what some might feel is the very minimum of what's required for security in general, but at least it's great to see that a majority of solutions use either or both communication layer security, basically, and SSL to make it short, right? TLS or DTLS, depending on the protocols they use, and data encryption. And like I said, and you can find that in the second half of the slide deck, the other practices that are becoming more and more popular include device management, and more specifically using over-the-air firmware upgrade for making sure that should you have any bug one way or the other that you need to fix, you can do that over the air. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this becoming even more used in the future. There's a bunch of standards, open standards that are fairly mature to do that, right? And lightweight M2M is certainly a great example. And there's open source implementations available at Eclipse or elsewhere that I think make it easier for people to bake security right in their devices. On the so number 2 was data collection, right? So data collection, data analytics, and luckily for the first time this year, we, if not anticipated, we knew that we wanted to understand better what the landscape is when it comes to IoT data collection, IoT databases, etc. And one thing we asked is, how does your IoT data look like? What kind of data do you really manipulate when you build an IoT solution? And number one, well, actually, it's pretty much a tie with those 3 categories and types of data. One is time series data. So sensor data, what you would think is sort of the IoT 101, and yeah, when you build an IoT solution, is probably for gathering some kind of metrics and collecting data from sensors. So not a big surprise, not a big surprise either, but although that's actually sort of comforting and probably a sign that the people who responded are actually building real solutions. Alongside the sensor data, equally important is to be able to store and manage all the device information. And to Mike's point earlier, device management is really important, and you need ways to manage your device inventory and to have a clear representation of what's are your what's the software that you're running, etc., etc. And sort of related is all things logs, right? The ability to know, to troubleshoot communication scenarios, and to have the history of all the operations you've performed in a particular device, etc., etc. And so this is, and the list goes on and on. Actually, this is the top 3, but there's lots of other types of data that people seem to care about, and that's. Another finding is basically that in terms of storing data, there's a need for both good old relational databases as well as NoSQL and time series databases, right? And well, before jumping into that, maybe Mike, you have something to that on that particular front.
Nope.
All right. Well, I'm sure this one you will be interested in, or will have some thoughts there. One thing we asked is, so knowing that there's a wide variety of data, what database do you use, by the way? What are you using to store your data? And the top 3 there is MySQL is first. So I guess that says that there's probably lots of sort of legacy data already sort of part of the backend systems and so on that people reuse and piggyback in their IoT solutions. But followed by, I mean, just behind MySQL are 2 non-relational databases technologies. And if you actually add up the sort of the market share of both MongoDB and InfluxDB, plus some of the others that we find down the list, like Cassandra, or even commercial solutions like DynamoDB. Well, a vast majority of databases out there and data stores are non-relational, and even more so if we look at and if we do the math of all the solutions being used. A vast majority, 93+% of the databases used for IoT and used by our respondents are open source. There's just a tiny amount of like the likes of Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server that show up in the list. But I guess what it says is that well, when people want to get started and build an IoT solution, there's two things. One, they want to get started quickly, and we know that open source is certainly helpful in that regard. You don't have to subscribe to any kind of cloud platform whatsoever. You don't have to buy a license or anything. You just fire up a Docker container with the database in, and away you go. And second is we've seen that data is where the value is for IoT, right? And putting your IoT data in the hands of a vendor and not necessarily having all the freedom and all the flexibility to export the data should you need to, and to basically at least feel like you own your data, might be one reason why people tend to favor open source. Right? But that was a surprise to me to see that that much open source used for IoT databases.
It'd be, I mean, this is beyond the scope of our survey, but it'd be interesting to know what sort of the percentage of adoption of these technologies are whenever people are doing, greenfield applications. I suspect that this is sort of indicative of a trend that more and more people, if given the choice, are going to start off with an open source database solution. And then when you see the proprietary database technologies, it's an indication that there's some legacy systems that are involved. I think very few people, I suspect that very few people start a brand new project with a proprietary database if they have a choice.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So I was quickly looking at the chat, and I don't see anyone asking questions just now on the chat. Mike and I are definitely interested in getting your thoughts and your feedback, or answering any questions you may have. So feel free to use the chat should you have any questions or comments. Well, next is the IoT programming languages. Mike, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So as you can see here, the top languages sort of stratify by where you are in the IoT stack. So as you would probably expect when you're talking about constrained devices, the predominant languages are C and C++, followed by Python and then Java. And to be honest, I'm actually even a little bit surprised that Java appears there, even if it's in fourth place. On the gateway side, you see a lot more Java, and again, you see a lot more Java on the cloud. And I think that's indicative of you have a little bit more memory, and now you're more concerned about things like programmer productivity and manageability once the application is deployed. And I think JavaScript in the number two spot in the cloud is what you would exactly expect. When you're talking about web-based or cloud-based development, Java and JavaScript, there's a lot of data that points to them being more or less neck and neck in those spaces. And it's also interesting to note that Python is consistently used across all of the stacks, and which is again the resurgence of Python over the last couple of years is something I've been personally watching with a lot of interest. But I think one of the things to really notice here is that there's no languages on this that are new and different and unexpected. What you're seeing here is people are using the languages that they know well in the places where you would commonly expect to see them. Although IoT is in many ways a new area and an emerging area, but when it actually comes to the programming languages, it's not yet, at least yet, spurred any programming language innovation. People are using the languages that they know, that are comfortable with, and they are using the languages where they best fit the solution. Where you've got the memory space and the ability to use Java, then you're seeing Java, and when you're doing deep embedded on a very constrained device, you're seeing C and C++. I think if so basically, I think the results that we're seeing here are confirming our preconceived notions or conventional wisdom in terms of what you would see on these various spots in the stacks.
Yeah, and well, for those interested, you can look at the sort of the full list of languages that came in the answers. And one area, although I fully agree with you, Mike, and people tend to use the languages they know, and the languages where they know they can also find knowledgeable people to work on constrained devices. It would seem that Rust is sort of becoming more and more popular. So it's still somewhat confidential, but it will be interesting to see if it takes off. I certainly hear about a lot of people who are pretty happy with the performances, the footprint of using Rust for constrained development. And I agree with you, Mike, on the constrained devices. Like seeing Java there, it might be a lesson for us. Maybe we should sort of define better what we call a constrained device. Maybe people just run have a Raspberry Pi, and so that's, yeah. I mean, we would maybe put it and call it a gateway, and they call it a constrained device. Yeah, and Python is pretty popular for all things data analytics and data processing. So it might also explain why it's so popular on the cloud side. But yeah, pretty much status quo actually from the past few years on that one. IoT operating systems, well, same, for better or worse. For better. Linux is sort of the operating system of choice for IoT in general, and of course that applies more for gateways and clouds, because like constrained devices, usually we're more talking about either bare metal or some kind of free RTOS. And actually, should you be interested in free RTOSes, you can see in the full deck that this year Amazon FreeRTOS came up first, followed by ARM Embed and Contiki for the embedded constrained embedded parts. But yeah, for the rest, Linux is definitely still pretty big. Number one would be Raspbian. So I guess lots of people not only use I mean, yeah, we know that Raspberry Pi is really popular for prototyping IoT solutions, and there's actually also people who ship commercial solutions based on Raspberry Pi. So that might be why Raspbian is so popular. It's actually followed and really close behind is Ubuntu and Ubuntu Core, and we certainly see Ubuntu and Ubuntu Core used more and more. Like depending on how familiar with the Ubuntu ecosystem, you may know that they have they're working hard on making sure that Ubuntu becomes sort of a distro of choice for doing secure deployments and secure rollouts of Linux packages, and yeah, they're certainly doing really good. And Debian would be the other Linux distro.
The thing I find striking about this is, I mean, Ubuntu is also Debian based. So what we're really seeing here is pretty much a clean sweep for Debian across the top three here. And so other sort of more traditional Linux distros for embedded, like Yocto, for example, it's not getting the market share that you might expect. And that could be in this case sample bias, right? We are a place that we're likely going to get the developers, focused on building solutions in our sample, we might be getting fewer of the sort of hardcore industrial folks that might be more interested in a fit-to-purpose kind of operating system like Yocto's rather than Debian. But it is kind of cool to see Debian making a clean sweep across the board here.
Yep. Another question that we've been asking for a few years: what cloud solution do you use for building your IoT stuff and your IoT products? So, and the choices include, like on that particular slide, we're listing the first three commercial hosted platforms out there, but we also ask about whether people use something like Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, or just straight Docker. And the actual top three is AWS, Azure, and followed by private on-prem hosting. But yeah, number one and clear number one is definitely AWS. And I think from last year, it's an increase, a 20+% increase in terms of people, number of people we said that they're actually using AWS, or I mean, I guess it means either good old AWS or anything from the AWS IoT portfolio, and we all know that there's a lot there for people to use. Azure is also doing pretty well, and growth-wise is sort of aligned with Amazon, although in terms of sort of absolute market share is still a bit behind. But we know that yeah, Microsoft is pushing really hard to especially in industrial IoT, and looking actually at the results. Like people who come from an industrial background, it would appear that Azure is slightly more popular to them. But I guess the main key finding there is to see that Google Cloud is not really taking off for IoT. So yeah, there's like there've just been some acquisitions lately, and it looks like they're trying to catch up. But just in general, and even according to other surveys out there, it would appear that Google Cloud is not really the platform that developers tend to like the most, and that seems to be the same for IoT. Like since last year, I think it's an 8% decrease in terms of adoption, and I mean, it will be interesting to see if they catch up, I guess.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think what we're seeing here is basically a snapshot of what's happening in the cloud platform wars in general, with AWS being the clear front runner, Azure being the favorite second choice, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your point of view, Google just not, at least at this point, getting a lot of traction. So I think this is pretty much reflective of what's happening in the industry at large.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And another area where we there's some interesting trends, including some surprising ones, is we ask people what messaging protocols they use. So the top messaging protocol still is MQTT. So we know that MQTT has been around for many years now, and has been open source for also close to 10 years, I guess now, at least like 7 years or so. And yeah, MQTT would appear to be used by a lot of people, and it's increasing over time. It will be interesting to see if this goes even further in the next years, now that MQTT 5 is around the corner, and some of the limitations that people would find in MQTT, MQTT 3, MQTT 5 tries to solve them. So that will be interesting to see. Another area where we see some changes is around the use of AMQP. So for those who don't know, AMQP is an enterprise class messaging protocol that basically allows people to build scalable messaging solutions. And so as opposed to MQTT, which is more meant to be as lightweight as possible and meant to be used by them by the devices to communicate with the servers. AMQP is the kind of protocol you would require when you build your messaging backend system, right? And the use of AMQP is increasing by quite a lot. I don't know off the top of my head, but like 30+% since last year. And I guess what this is saying is that people, again, to the point of data is becoming important, and people are becoming real with their IoT solutions, and they need to start building servers that scale. And that it would seem that AMQP would be the preferred messaging protocol there. Two other interesting things to notice: XMPP. It's been many years since XMPP has been sort of considered for building IoT solutions, and I'm pretty sure there's people that are pretty successful with using XMPP for IoT. But for our respondents, it would appear that it's becoming sort of insignificant. So again, maybe some bias, but pretty much since 2015, we see a steady decrease in the adoption of XMPP. And last but not least, HTTP. And by the way, we ask people whether they use WebSockets also for doing messaging. But WebSockets can obviously be many things. It can be MQTT over WebSocket. It can be custom protocols. But it would appear to be pretty popular. And speaking of more of HTTP. Legacy HTTP would appear to be on the downward trend, whereas HTTP2 is becoming more popular. So I don't know if people are ditching one for the other, but in any case, it would appear that HTTP2 is becoming more and more real. And I guess like further down the road, it might become competition for MQTT one way or the other. And it will be interesting to see over time how this evolves.
It's interesting that when we earlier called out the fact that 93% of the databases were open source, but on the protocol stack we basically just assume open source. Every 5 out of the 6 protocols shown here on the page are open protocols, and proprietary protocols, to the extent that it's there at all, is shown as one that's in decline. I think that kind of reaffirms what we started when we first started Eclipse IoT 6 years ago. Now I think it was 6. We were convinced that open source was going to be the way to go for the common pieces of infrastructure for the IoT, and this is clearly indicating that going in assumption on our part was the correct one, and that open source is absolutely winning in IoT. It's pretty much running the board in the protocol stack area.
Yeah. So I guess that's it for the key findings. And at this point, I think I will actually need to put an eye on the chat and see if there's any questions. And I don't think I see. I see questions at this point, so let's wait maybe a couple minutes for to see if people have questions. I think in general, well, again, the full slide deck is available for you to have a look at, and there's certainly some other sort of non-controversial findings that you may be interested in, and just in general understanding better sort of the demographics of the respondents. I cannot say for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if we will do the same survey again this year. So any feedback on questions that you think we should be adding or anything like that, that would certainly be useful to us. But yeah, it was it's important to us.
I have feedback.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I have a question I want to add, which is, and we have to figure out how to do this. But once people,
I know what to.
Yeah. Once people say which programming language they're using, I'd like to find out what kind of frameworks they're using. So, for example, in the Java space, are people kind of rolling their own? Are they using OSGI? Are they using Jigsaw-based modularity? There's a bunch of different sort of under the sort of one level further refinement in terms of the platform or frameworks that programming frameworks that people are using in their solutions that I would personally be interested in. And this is supposed to be an IoT Developer Survey. And when you think about development, I think that you'll find that developers identify with the frameworks they use. And so when I said OSGI, that's kind of like on the gateway side. This is why we haven't asked it so far, because it can get exponentially complicated, right? So in the cloud, people are going to say things, yeah, I use Vertex, or I use Spring Boot, or there's a long list of potential frameworks at different spots in the stack that we could be asking about. But personally, I am interested in that because I think it sort of it'll be interesting to see which kind, and track that over a couple of years and see which frameworks are becoming more predominant in these areas.
Yeah. That's certainly a question that we need to figure out how to add next year. And another thing that might be interesting to do is to look at sort of specialize the survey for a particular industry. That for example, I would love to understand better in the context of industrial IoT, whether the same not only the same trends emerge, but maybe understanding better what protocols are relevant there, or again what frameworks are popular. And maybe for home automation, we've seen that home automation is pretty high in the list, what the protocols that people care about there, etc., etc. So yeah. And I don't see any questions actually, so I guess I will start to slowly wrap up. Off the top of my head, I don't remember whether we have another webinar planned. I think we have a tentative webinar on May the 2nd, so stay tuned for that. And just in any case, if you're a regular watcher of the show, as always, should you have any suggestions of talks, or if you yourself would like to present something, let us know, and we'll be happy to add you to the schedule for the weeks to come. So yeah, with that, I mean, if you have any other further feedback or questions, you can certainly put them in the comments of the YouTube video, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much, Mike. That was great to share the results with you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.